everyone, it is Dr. Hinson here of the Good Doctor of Abbey Research, and I am joined by Dr. Donnelly as always. And we are in for a penny, in for a pound on season 1, episode 2 of The Handmaid's Tale, entitled Birthday. And before I kick to Dr. Donnelly for her first thoughts and impressions, I'll give you just a little bit of a recap here. So in this episode, we again see the burgeoning friendship between Offred and Offred as they go shopping together, and they reveal more about themselves to each other. What they see their local church, St. Paul's Catholic Church, being destroyed by the new regime, and Offred admits that they also destroyed St. Patrick's Church in Manhattan to try to, quote, erase the fact that it ever existed. So apparently Catholicism on the outs in Gilead, for I'm sure many good reasons. And when Offred says, hey, how do you know about this? Why do you know this? Offred's like, yo, I'm in the resistance. That's not what she says, but she tells her she's in the resistance against the government. And Offred's like, no, thank you. I'm still trying to find my daughter and not die. So I will not join the resistance today. Nick, who we meet, is the commander's driver, tells Offred that the commander wants to see her later that night, which is, you're not allowed to be alone with the commander. I think you're only allowed to see him if you're a handmaid when he's trying to impregnate you, which is delightful. And then we get the birthing ceremony for Warren / Janine's child. And we get to see the interworkings of the wives and the handmaids, which is fascinating, and how an actual birth is treated in a society that is suffering from infertility. And then we get some more flashbacks. As always, June Offred remembers the birth of her and her husband Luke's daughter, Hannah. And at that time, even when Hannah was born, healthy births were very, very rare. And a woman tried to kidnap Hannah from the hospital. And was arrested. It was very dramatic. And then Offred goes to the commander's office in the evening as instructed. And it turns out that homeboy just wants to play Scrabble. So didn't see that one coming at all when I was watching this episode. To her great relief, God only knows what she thought was going to happen when she went in there. And our brave little June did anyway. But no, he just likes board games. And then all of a sudden, we end the episode with the disappearance of our dear Roy Gilmore, when Offred goes to tell her, you never believe I got to play Scrabble last night. Offglen is not Offglen, or the Offglen that we know, and she has been replaced. End scene. So, Dr. Donnelly, what are your thoughts?
I have so many questions. So clearly that whole conversation about St. Pat's was really significant to me, because St. Patrick's Cathedral is the St. Paul's of America. It's not only the seat of Catholicism in the United States, it's, America's tourist church. If you're in New York and you're not religious or Christian at all, you probably still go to St. Pat's.
I've been to St. Patrick's.
Yeah, it's a thing. And more people go there as a tourist destination than our actual national cathedral, which is down in Washington. So to erase that, and to try to expunge America's history, there has always been, since the very beginning of the United States, a significant anti-Catholic bias, forever. And that stems back to the Reformation and the way that King Henry VIII handled the Reformation politically.
Everything goes back to the Reformation.
Everything.
Everything does.
The Reformation and the Enlightenment. Everything goes back.
Everything.
Because King Henry's decision about, essentially, he made everybody Protestant. Then his daughter came along. For those who don't know English history, his daughter came along. She's called Bloody Mary because she just feckin' executed everybody who was Protestant, tried to make England Catholic again. Didn't go super well for her.
Didn't work. No.
So then Lizzie the first hops back in the joint because Mary's gone.
Yep.
And because she's her father's daughter, makes everybody Protestant again. But like, we didn't really pass that message to the Scottish people or the Irish, so there was a whole lot more bloodshed for a lot longer, and then the Germans got in. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So my guess is that Gilead is I mean, it's fundamentalist evangelical of some fashion, at some genesis. Clearly, it can't be truly evangelical because of the lack of Jesus. But it's enough conservative Protestant that they have to expunge Catholicism.
Yeah, and also it's a theocratic state, right? And so the authority has to be invested in the state. And that is the case for Catholicism.
Yeah, but that's the only, but it's specific that the two churches we hear being expunged are Catholic, I think.
Yeah.
That they're not talking about like, well, they also tore down the Salvation Army house. Like,
yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, I see the main theme of the episode as being power, like how Offred took some of hers back by losing at Scrabble. And then that really bizarre birthing situation that the chanting, like what was all that? Like, do the wives really think that by Lamaze breathing and drinking dainty tea, they have invested in motherhood? Like, that is...
Really? That's all it takes. Pro
like,
tips, wives.
Like, that is such a shadow of reality, but this is all they're left with, and so they have to accept it?
Yeah.
So beyond the fact that the whole story is an imprisonment narrative, especially this birthday situation is an imprisonment narrative, is there anything that particular that resonated with you in this episode?
Yeah, so I mean, the nutty world of Gilead, episode 2, we're all welcome on this crazy train, right? One of the things that I found so interesting was that just seeing kind of the evolution of TV series and TV shows, we moved past the setup episode, which was episode 1. And now we're getting into the details. And I mean, clearly from my perspective, the most captivating part of the episode was the birthing ritual and how, I mean, really the first episode introduced the imprisonment of the handmaids in this new society. But we really see how restricted the wives are through the birthing ceremony as well. They are wedded, in that, pardon the terrible pun, they are as connected to their control mechanisms and a part of this regime as the handmaids. They just have greater quote unquote freedom. I mean, they all have to wear the same color clothes still, but you know, they don't get forcibly raped, so bully for them. But we start to see the differentiation between those two worlds as well, and we begin to understand some of the other layers. We see how the Marthas interact and how the eyes interact, and the drivers and all of that. And I think you've hit on a really key point, that this is still a sympathetic perspective of the wives, sort of, who are imprisoned in these roles. So it's going to be interesting to see throughout the series how they find methods to resist, if the wives do at all, or if they have less opportunities to find some sort of sense of communality. I think that might be a piece that's missing. The handmaids, you kind of get the sense, are in this together. And the wives have it a bit at the birthing ceremony, but they're also a lot more segregated. And they might not have as many structured social activities. We'll find out if we get more glimpse into that wives world. So that dynamic between the wives and the handmaids really fascinated me in this episode, and we get to see their interactions a lot more. So from your religious lens, was there anything aside from the destruction of the churches and the reference of the churches that struck you? Did anything else jump out? Yeah,
so this idea of organized socialization and class structure, which is also what we have with we'll put a pin in that, because I think that's going to come to play later. But in terms of religiosity, there was this small moment where somebody said that good births are based on devotion to God. And that like arrested me for a minute, because that kind of language is used in real life in our world, even when it's not explicitly said. Women in the church who deal with infertility are frequently sold this narrative that they need to be holier or cleaner or healthier or something to bear in order to bear children, and that perhaps their sins are preventing implementation. I mean, it's a crock of crap, clearly, from a medical perspective, but the theological ramifications on someone's psyche for that are also no small thing. I have lots of friends, pastors' wives, who have dealt with infertility that talk about this extensively. Like, if one more person tells them that they're praying for them to have a baby, it's like, okay, well, my prayer, if I don't have a baby, is that because God doesn't want me to have, like,
Yeah.
so additionally, this language is one of the ways that women are frequently treated as less. Like, even though it takes two to tango, the onus of bearing and raising children is both overtly and covertly placed exclusively on women in most religious circles.
Yeah.
So when women cannot conceive or they choose not to, it's frequently seen as wrong or defective or sinful. And we, in many religious circles, use the word sinful to mean everything else. Like, sinful means broken. Sinful means wrong. Sinful, it's like our go-to, if everything is sinful, nothing is sinful kind of thing.
Yeah. That makes total sense, because, I mean, right, it's the woman's job to bear children. And I know enough about our religious understanding of relationships and the story of Adam and Eve to know that it was, Eve's responsibility, also Eve's fault, everything. So it all goes back to Eve, but it's also their job to bear children, and that allows for the structure of the system in which wives are given this elevated, presumably holy status in Gilead, and the extraordinary pressure on the handmaids to conceive, because the wives cannot.
And I think the extraordinary pressure on the wives to make sure their handmaids conceive.
Yeah, there's a great deal of pressure that I still think their ability to be viewed as a successful or good or not sinful wife is to have a pregnant handmaid.
Yep.
So a lot of their role in this is tied to that as well, which puts an extraordinary amount of pressure on them. Which is why I think it's so interesting that conceiving and raising the children are separated in this society, and that the handmaids are only allowed to provide the sustenance, like the breastfeeding, but the wives take over all the other duties of raising the children. So in this society, the handmaids have no ownership at all over the baby that they grow and give to the world successfully, aside from feeding it and keeping it healthy. And I'm also struck by how they've subverted that perception that women who cannot conceive are sinful, and that the wives who are barren are revered and given this elevated status. And the women who can conceive are not given elevated status. They are enslaved and imprisoned. And they've created a religious justification for a low fertility rate. And the fact that we learn in this episode that in Gilead, only 1 in 5 births are healthy. But I'd really like to go back to your notion of power as a theme for this episode, especially in what I saw take place from a control and confinement perspective. Resistance to the established system takes its form in really small movements in a lot of ways. Gestures, actions that won't disturb the overall order. Like when Offred refuses to eat the cookie at the birthing ceremony and ritual. Like, that's just a little bit of June being like, you know what? I'm here, I'm playing your game, I'm doing what you're telling me to, but I don't have to do everything. And one thing I can do to make myself feel like an individual, not like a handmaid, like June, is to say, no thanks for the cookie. But then we see the end of the episode, she is like openly subverting that order and control. And she breaks all these social norms. When the commander invites her into his office to play Scrabble. It was a weird one, I'll give him that. But she looks at him, which she's not allowed to do. She touches him, which she's not allowed to do. She speaks to him normally, which she's not allowed to do. But I think, like, because he brought her in, and as soon as she was like, oh, we're going to play Scrabble, she was like, oh, maybe he's removing these walls. So she was pushing the boundaries already to see what she could get away with, which is really interesting. What did you make of that scene? What do you think the writers wanted us to get from the Scrabble scene? It was still so weird. But
well, like, I mean, if you think about it, Gilead has absolutely no intimacy, right? So they don't value the emotional covenant of marriage at all.
Yeah.
And like, as a married person myself, the and we're not having children. So like in Gilead's world, our marriage serves no purpose, right? It's everything's utilitarian and we wouldn't be married. And you and I've had a lot of conversations about where we would end up in Gilead. And I think we assume you would end up in the colonies and I'd be a Martha, I think is what we came down to. We're not sure.
I don't know. Well, if I have viable ovaries, I could be
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Like, listeners, it's a real fun conversation to have with your best friend about whether or not you think you have viable ovaries. So
how do they find this out in Gilead? How do they test this? We don't know.
Yeah, a whole 35-minute conversation driving down 95 a couple days ago.
Sure.
But I don't know how marriages work without intimacy, personally. And I think when we talk to people who have gotten divorced, that's one of the reasons the divorce happens, is that the emotional connection is gone. Yeah. And he very clearly no longer has one with Serena Joy. If he ever did, we don't know. Maybe they were deeply, deeply in love at some point, but they are no longer anything other than utilitarian baby makers.
I don't think they're allowed to be. I don't think in this world you're allowed to have an emotional connection with somebody.
Yeah. So like these are the only moments of kindness we've ever seen in Gilead, which is clearly still part of this man. And like his resistance is kindness.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is weird.
Yeah. So I think the writers want us to understand the world is complicated. And that even though this power narrative is unity and uniformity, nothing is that simple, and people are still fundamentally people.
People, yeah.
Who like to play Scrabble and flirt with the pretty girl. So.
Yeah, and feel something close to normality in a society where everything that was normal has been flipped.
Yep. And construct comfort.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we're all still human beings.
So I can't wait to see what happens next. Slightly also nervous, like
they're going somewhere. We'll find out.
So from the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, I'm Dr. Donnelly.
And I'm Dr. Hinson.
And we'll see you next episode. Bye.